Hi, my name is Kate Crosby. I'm going to talk about the environmental and cultural factors for the pornography and sex addiction population. In my research and study of this topic, I have found that many people have heard of pornography addiction, but are unfamiliar with the concept of sex addiction as a whole. So let's first take a look at some definitions of pornography and sex addiction. Patrick Carnes defines pornography addiction as compulsive repeated use of pornography that leads to negative consequences in one's relationships and personal well-being. The World Health Organization defines sex addiction in the ICD-11 as a persistent pattern of failure to control intense, repetitive sexual impulses or urges resulting in repetitive sexual behavior. And the Mayo Clinic defines sex addiction as an excessive preoccupation with sexual fantasies, urges, or behaviors that is difficult to control, causes you distress, or negatively affects your health, job, relationships, or other parts of your life. I hope these definitions will give you a better understanding of what constitutes these addictions as we move forward in talking about this population. Let's take a look at some health concerns faced by this population. Pornography and sex addicts are at risk for depression, suicide, and other mental health issues due to the shame and embarrassment experienced from this addiction. They are also at risk for sexually transmitted infections due to the behaviors associated with this addiction, and financial instability due to the addiction's effects on the individual's job. Lastly, Rosenberg has found the following disorders in connection to sex addiction: affect dysregulation, depression and anxiety, impulsivity, loneliness, low self-worth and insecure attachment styles, personal distress, risk-taking behaviors such as substance abuse, and self-hatred and shame. This population is portrayed in the media in many ways. Television shows and movies either portray pornography and sex use as a normal human behavior, or these addictions are joked about and made fun of. When these addictions make headlines in the news, it is usually relating to a serious situation, such as pedophilia, child pornography, etc. These two views showcase these addictions on both ends of the spectrum, not giving light to the people in the middle of the spectrum. This portrayal may create a stigma around having a pornography and sex addiction. This stigma may create isolation for the individual and may put them at risk for increased mental health issues. Family and peers play a big role in health outcomes for these individuals. Lack of support from family and peers may contribute to poorer health outcomes for the pornography and sex addict. This lack of support may lead to a disruption in social cohesion and social networks for the individual. Let's take a look at the cyclical nature of the vulnerability of the pornography and sex addiction population. The pornography and sex addict is vulnerable due to the shame and stigma they experience, putting them at higher risk for psychosocial concerns. This shame that contributes to the vulnerability for this population recurs for two reasons. First, this shame recurs for the individual when they are judged by others. And second, the individual also often finds themselves in a cycle of feeling shame about their behaviors and then giving into those behaviors to help them feel better and minimize the feelings of shame. This creates what is known as the shame cycle and can be a difficult cycle to break. When looking at how the legal and political system affects this population, I found that, consistently through local, state, and national levels, the individual in the pornography and sex addiction population are portrayed solely as people who participate in paraphilic, compulsive sexual behavior. Derbyshire explains that paraphilic, compulsive sexual behaviors tend to be those behaviors that are socially unacceptable and include non-human objects and suffering of self or a partner, child, or non-consenting person. This portrayal hinders the population because these behaviors are what often come to mind with pornography and sex addicts, creating more taboo and stigma for this population, and decreased awareness of the varying levels of pornography and sex addicts. There are many potential barriers that make this population more vulnerable within the larger community. First, let's take a look at the barrier of religion. Grubbs explains that religions often promote more conservative sexual values and disapprove of pornography use. Studies show that pornography use and related addictions result in religious and spiritual struggle, and that these struggles indicate poor mental and physical well-being. Next, let's look at general barriers created by society's views and attitudes towards this population. In society, there is taboo and stigma around this addiction that leads to discrimination against these individuals. Overall, these barriers may make this population more vulnerable for emotional and physical health concerns. In my research, I found that there is a stigma towards the pornography and sex addiction population, but there are no specific regions of the world that this population would be in more danger or be shunned. Poor socioeconomic status can greatly affect the pornography and sex addict population because these individuals may already be facing financial strain due to buying pornography and paying for sexual services. The individual may choose to use any money they have to put towards their addictive behaviors, rather than putting that money towards things like food, shelter, clothing, etc. These things that I just listed make up the bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and without them, the individual will face great instability. The health outcomes of the pornography and sex addiction population do not seem to be particularly affected by race and ethnicity, but when these two things occur together, that person may experience greater health issues overall. Bergeron states that racial discrimination leads to poor physical and mental health outcomes. Individuals experiencing racial discrimination and discrimination from being a part of the pornography and sex addiction population may have compounded physical and mental health issues. Social support has been found to lessen the effects of discrimination in these situations. Religion has the potential to greatly affect the health outcomes of the pornography and sex addict. Grubbs states that individuals often face disapproval from their religious organizations regarding their behaviors. This disapproval may lead to shame, low self-esteem, depression, and many more issues. There is also a connection between perceived pornography and sex addiction and religious participation. This can be troublesome because religious teachings often confirm this perceived belief, whether that person is actually an addict or not, which further enhances the individual's shame. In the past, it was thought that sex addiction only affected men, and early studies focused solely on men. This sole focus on male addicts may lead to increased shame and lack of support for the female sex addict, because resources are directed at the opposite gender. More rural areas may affect the individual because they may be less aware of the resources available to them, including 12-step programs and certified sex addiction therapists. Telehealth and telemedicine can benefit these individuals because they can receive the care they need in the safety and privacy of their home, avoiding potential discrimination and judgment of society. There are many implicit biases surrounding this population. A few of them are: pornography and sex addictions are not real addictions. Pornography and sex addiction is a male issue, and women do not struggle with these addictions. And the individual can simply choose to stop their behaviors. Once someone becomes aware of and acknowledges the inaccuracies of these implicit biases, they can then understand that there is usually an underlying cause for the addiction. They can also understand that the attitude of shame they have been portraying towards the individual has been further perpetuating the individual's addictive behaviors. Through my research, I was not able to find any specific regions of the world where disparities would have less influence on health for this population. But the health of this population will be affected in areas of the world where these behaviors are accepted as addictions and there are supportive resources available for the individual. More acceptance and support for the individual may lead to reduced feelings of shame, therefore breaking the shame cycle. Here are my references. Thank you for listening. I hope you're able to learn something about the environmental and cultural factors for the pornography and sex addiction population.